Warren Whitlock leaned in toward Maris like he was sharing a joke, not closing out our marriage. I saw his lips move. 5 quick words, so soft even the court reporter didn't blink. Maris's camera smile froze. Her face went dead white, and her hand shook so hard the signature page fluttered. My name is Caleb Rourke. I was 36 years old. I lived in Henrico County, just outside Richmond, and that morning I sat in the Richmond Family Court Annex, courtroom 3C, wearing the plainest gray suit I owned. I looked like the guy who'd already been taken apart and reassembled with the seams still showing. The air smelled like copier toner and old coffee. A bailiff in a wrinkled shirt stood by the door, arms folded, watching us like we might jump each other. Maris's perfume still reached me across the table, sharp and expensive, like she was daring me to remember the life she'd already sold. Judge Patrice Holden sat up on the bench with the calm eyes of someone who'd watched love turn into paperwork 1,000 times. She didn't gasp or lean forward. She just watched, pen resting in her hand like she was waiting to see which lie would fall first. Quick note, before listening, share which city or country you're watching from. And let's continue. Maris kept her chin up at the start like she was about to cut a ribbon for a new project. Her mother, Giselle Calder, sat behind her in the second row, back straight, lips tight, acting like I was something you scraped off a shoe. Across the aisle, my lawyer, Celeste Marrero, flipped through our packet with steady hands. She didn't need to look at Maris to know what that whisper did. Warren straightened in his chair, smooth as ever, and Maris's eyes darted over the pages like they'd turned into a foreign language. The trembling got worse. She tried to press the pen down, but the tip skated, and her signature came out jagged. Celeste leaned close to me and murmured, "Keep your face neutral, and let them hang themselves." Her voice was quiet, but it landed hard. Judge Holden cleared her throat. "Ms. Calder, do you understand you're signing the final agreement as written?" Maris swallowed, still staring at the page. "Yes, Your Honor," she said, and her voice cracked on the last word. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. For years, I'd been the quiet one in our house, the one who got talked over, the one who got told to be supportive. People always think the loud one is the strong one. Maris built her whole life on that. The corners of my mouth lifted just a little. It wasn't happiness. It was the feeling of a plan finally closing, quiet, clean, and certain. I reached for my pen, initialed the last box, and pushed the packet back across the table. That packet sat between us like a slab of concrete, and my fingers still felt the ink on the tips. Maris stared at the pages like she could scare them into changing, and that look yanked me back to the first time I ever met her, when her smile could still convince me she was building something real. I was 20 then, working as a clerk in a title and escrow office in Richmond. It wasn't glamorous, but I could read a file fast, catch missing pages, and notice when numbers didn't line up. I learned early that paperwork didn't care how confident you sounded, and I was proud of being the guy who caught problems before they exploded. Maris walked in one afternoon in heels that clicked hard on the tile, like the building belonged to her. She was 26, already getting her name dropped in local business write-ups, and she carried herself like a headline. She set a folder down and said, "I need this closed quick because my project is on a deadline." I flipped through it, found a gap in the chain of title, and pushed it back across the counter. "This isn't ready, and if you rush it, it comes back on you," I told her. Her eyes tightened for half a second. Then she smiled and said, "Then you're the one who's going to help me fix it." Calder Urban Revival was her stage from the start. She loved showrooms and model units, bright lights, and glossy brochures about bringing neighborhoods back. She was the face shaking hands for photos, and I became the hands keeping the machinery from grinding apart. On paper, I was the supportive husband she could mention at fundraisers. In real life, I tracked invoices, chased contractors, handled change orders, and talked angry suppliers down when they were ready to file liens. When a vendor threatened to stop deliveries, she'd snap, "Handle it, Caleb, and do not make me look small." And then she'd glide back into the room like nothing happened. The attention always landed on her. I stood beside her at award dinners while she thanked the team and the community, and somehow my name never showed up in her mouth. When I brought it up later, she'd say, "Stop being sensitive, we're winning." Like that ended the conversation. Giselle Calder treated me like a helper who forgot to clock out, smiling polite while her eyes did the insulting. "Maris has expensive taste in projects," she'd say, "so it's good she married someone who can follow instructions." Nate Holloway stayed close too, my buddy from school who sold insurance and acted like he was looking out for me. He'd say, "I hate how much pressure you're under." Then he'd slide in, "So what's her business really doing, cash-wise?" He asked those questions too often, and he listened a little too hard when I tried to dodge them. Over time, Maris started acting like my work happened by magic, like the late nights and the saved deals were just part of the air in the house. The biggest warning sign wasn't her ego, it was how comfortable she got making big moves without telling me, like I was a roommate instead of her partner. I stayed anyway because we had Evan, and I kept telling myself steady loyalty would matter to her eventually. That night, after Evan went to bed, I opened my laptop and started cleaning up her numbers again. The spreadsheet loaded on my laptop, and the dining room light hummed over the table. Receipts and vendor emails were spread out in small piles, and I kept listening for Evan in case he wandered out half asleep. Maris was out networking, which usually meant cocktails, selfies, and her laughing too loud for the room. I was reconciling month-end numbers when a transfer line caught my eye. It went to an account I didn't recognize, dressed up with a bland label that looked intentional. 2 pages later, another transfer showed up, spaced out just right to feel normal if you weren't paying attention. My escrow habits woke up and I stopped treating it like routine. I pulled bank statements, then dug out loan paperwork, then grabbed the property file from the cabinet. After an hour, I saw the same names and codes repeating, like a stain that wouldn't wash out. Maris bragged that the house was ours, like it proved she was a winner. What I found was debt stacked in layers, a first mortgage, a second, and then a third that only made sense if you were desperate or hiding. I traced signatures and found hers every time, and nobody had warned me about any of it. The business looked perfect on social media, all clean photos and victory captions, but the inside was rotten. Credit lines were pushed to the edge, vendors were unpaid, and tax notices showed up like clockwork. Equipment leases stretched on, and the math only worked if you lied to yourself. What dropped my stomach wasn't the debt by itself, because debt can be a tool when you respect it. It was the personal spending buried inside the business charges, tucked in like it belonged there. I saw travel I wasn't on, purchases that never came home, and cash pulls with no business reason. I didn't confront Maris when she came home late and tossed her phone on the counter like a trophy. I stayed quiet because I knew exactly what she'd do. Deny, flip it, and then reach for anything I had left until I was the villain. Her voice would get loud, the story would change, and suddenly I'd be apologizing for asking questions. So I let her talk about growth while I copied files and wrote notes she couldn't charm away. By morning, I had a folder thick enough to scare me, and I called my uncle Deke Rourke. He was a retired auditor who didn't do speeches, and he answered with a flat, "Tell me what you found." I said, "I need the truth, even if it makes me sick." Deke met me that night at a diner off the highway, and he went straight to work. He stacked my papers, put on his glasses, and ran through them like he was counting mistakes. When he finally looked up, his voice was quiet as a funeral. "She's balancing her image on borrowed money, and she's using the family to do it." I had my own separate money, my old retirement account, and an inheritance from my dad's side, and I realized it was the only lifeboat in that house. If I started a loud fight, Maris would get her hands into it, and she'd call it fair while she smiled for the cameras. I told Deke, "I'm not doing this in the open because she'll burn it all just to win the room." Then I went home, opened a fresh drive, and started backing up every file I had for Evan's future. The drive light blinked steady while files copied over, and I kept feeding it PDFs like I was laying down a paper levee before the water rose. I labeled folders with dates and plain names, nothing dramatic because drama was what Maris survived on. When the last progress bar hit the end, I made a second copy and tucked it in a drawer under Evan's old school papers. The next morning, I met Deke in a cramped office building near Broad Street. He slid my notes back to me and said, "You do not half protect a kid, Caleb, and you do not leave loose threads." I told him I wanted Evan safe even if I ended up sleeping on somebody's couch, and Deke nodded like that was the only correct answer. Then he pointed at my list of accounts and said, "No sloppy transfers, no shared accounts, and no words like later or soon." He kept repeating the same line until it sank into my bones. "Paper is what courts believe," he said, tapping the table with 2 fingers like a metronome. He brought in a trust attorney a week later, a woman named Cheryl Vance, who spoke like every sentence had already been tested in a courtroom. Cheryl looked at me over her glasses and said, "If you want this untouchable, we draft it clean and we draft it mean." I told her, "I'm not trying to be nice, I'm trying to be permanent," and she didn't even blink. I moved my separate money into an irrevocable trust for Evan called the Ashford Bridge Trust. It was about $247,000 from retirement funds and $318,000 from my inheritance, and writing those amounts down made my chest tighten. My name wasn't listed as a beneficiary, and Maris's name wasn't anywhere near it, not in a clause, not in a footnote, not even in a sentence that thanked the air. It was for Evan's school, his first home, emergencies, whatever life decided to throw at him when I couldn't stand in front of it anymore. Deke made me do every step like we were building a wall in a storm. He said, "If you give her one angle, she will squeeze through it and call it fairness." And I believed him because I'd watched her do it to vendors and partners for years. Cheryl drafted the language tight, and when I asked if it was really that serious, she said, "An irrevocable trust is only as strong as the words inside it, so we do not get cute." I signed where she pointed, initialed where she marked, and walked out with my hands shaking in a way I refused to show anybody at home. My sister Mara helped without making it weird. She taught at a community college and had a backbone you couldn't bend, and when I asked if I could store copies at her place, she said, "Bring the boxes tonight, and do not talk yourself out of it." I showed up with binders and drives, and she cleared a shelf in her hall closet like she'd been waiting for me to wake up. She looked me dead in the face and said, "If she comes sniffing around, I will tell her to leave before she finishes her first sentence." After that, I copied everything. Loan files, bank statements, vendor emails, tax letters, and any proof that showed where the debts lived and whose signature put them there. I also started watching Nate more closely because he asked the wrong questions, like he was shopping for details instead of checking on me. One afternoon, he leaned on my counter and said, "So are you guys still growing, or is Maris just posting like you're growing?" I kept my voice flat and said, "Business is business, and you do not need the numbers." And his smile slipped for a second. For 3 years, I acted normal on purpose. I showed up to Maris's events, smiled in group photos, and kept the engine running because Evan needed stability, not a public war. The wild part was Maris got sloppier the more confident she became, stacking bigger leases, dumping money into flashier showroom updates, and throwing more celebration dinners like applause could pay interest. She kept talking about new chapters, and every time she said it, I heard new victims. Evan noticed things before I wanted him to. He'd watch her come home buzzing, then watch her snap at me for asking simple questions, and his eyes would narrow like he was filing it away. One night he muttered, "Mom acts different when people are watching," and I told him, "You keep your focus on school and you let me handle adult problems." Then I went to my desk, slid a flash drive into my pocket, and walked back out to Maris's next photo line with my smile already loaded. I held that smile through photos, but it felt like wearing a mask that was already cracking. On a Monday night, Maris came in brisk, phone in hand, and didn't bother with warm-up. "We're done. I want the house, the cars, the company," she said, like she was reading a memo. Evan stood in the hallway, 15 and stuck between us, and Maris aimed the next line at him without blinking. "He can stay with you, because I'm not doing the daily stuff," she said, and she flicked her wrist like she was assigning a task. I said, "You're really saying this in front of him?" And she answered, "He needs to hear reality." Evan's jaw tightened, and he walked back toward his room. Maris followed through fast. Within a week, my clothes and books were piled in the basement office, and my side of the closet looked like it had been erased. My card declined at a gas station, then the joint card stopped too, and she told me, "The accounts need to be separated," like it was a mature solution instead of a power move. I kept my voice even and started saving every bank notice that hit the mailbox. Giselle showed up wearing pearls and carrying trash bags, not boxes, like she couldn't stand the idea of treating my stuff with dignity. She snapped a bag open and said, "We'll decide what you actually earned," while Maris leaned against the wall and watched. I said, "Put your hands on my things again and you can leave," and Giselle smiled like I'd proved her point. Evan hovered at the stairs, and I told him to go upstairs before they dragged him into it. Then Maris started bringing Kellen Shaw around, 33, smooth hair, teeth, always dressed like he was headed to a photo shoot. He drifted through my kitchen with his hands in my cabinets, sipping water from my glass like it was included in the tour. Maris laughed too loud at everything he said, and she kept glancing at me to see if I'd react. Kellen looked at me once and asked, "Where do you keep the extra filters for the fridge?" And I told him, "If you're so comfortable here, you can find them yourself." Maris didn't hide any of it, because hiding would have been mercy. She wanted me to feel replaced, like my usefulness had an expiration date, and she wanted Evan to absorb that lesson too. Evan got quieter every week, not cold toward me, just careful, like any sentence could be used against him later. I tried to talk to him at the sink one night and said, "If she's filling your head, tell me." And he replied, "I don't want another fight," before he grabbed his plate and left the room. Mara came over furious and said, "Give me an hour and I'll make her wish she'd never tried this," while she paced my basement office and pointed at the mess like it was a crime scene. Deke told me the opposite on the phone, steady and blunt. "Stay calm and let the paper do the damage, because noise is where she's strongest." I did both in my own way, calm face upstairs and sharp planning downstairs, stacking binders and labeling dates until my fingers cramped. When Maris strutted around upstairs like she'd already won, I kept my head down and kept building my case. I hired Celeste Marrero, a family law attorney with a steady voice and a mean talent for reading financial disasters without flinching. She flipped through my binders, paused on a debt notice, and asked, "Did she ever disclose any of this to you?" I said, "She disclosed speeches." And Celeste looked up and said, "You're not here to win the house. You're here to survive the debt. We can do that if you stay patient." I signed the agreement with her pen and slid it back across the desk. I left Celeste's office with her card in my wallet and my head already in defense mode. I kept my face tired on purpose because Maris fed on reaction. Nate Holloway was the first guy to check on me, sliding onto my porch with 2 coffees and that rehearsed sorrow people wear. "Man, I hate this for you, and I'm here if you need anything," he said, like he was doing charity work. I let him in, thanked him, and watched him look around my living room like he was memorizing angles. After that, Maris started snapping back at plans I hadn't told her. She'd make comments about neighborhoods I'd only mentioned once, or she'd twist Celeste's advice into a joke at my expense. One night, she leaned on the counter with Giselle beside her and said, "Caleb thinks he's going to get cute in court." And Giselle replied, "He was always more confident than capable." Evan paused on the stairs, heard it, and kept walking without saying a word. So I tested it. When Nate came over again, I acted like I was desperate and said, "I might fight for the house, because Evan deserves to stay put." Nate nodded fast and answered, "That sounds fair, and you should do what you feel you have to do," while he stared into his cup like he was memorizing the line. Within a day, Maris mocked that exact sentence in front of Giselle, and she smiled at me like she'd caught me lying. I called Celeste and said, "She's reacting to things I never told her." Celeste didn't hesitate. "Someone's feeding her, and it's not the court," she said, and her voice sharpened on the next part. "Stop treating Nate like family, because he is not acting like family." Nate didn't back off, he leaned in harder. He asked for a copy of a budget I'd made, claiming he wanted to help me plan for the transition. I told him, "No, that's private, and you do not need it," and I held my ground even when his smile went thin. "Come on, Caleb, I'm trying to keep you from getting wrecked," he pushed, like my finances were his business, so I stood up and opened the door until he left. About a week later, my phone lit up with a cloud storage alert while I was folding Evan's laundry. Somebody tried to log in from a new device, and the recovery attempt tied back to a number I recognized before my brain caught up. It was Nate's number, the same one I'd had saved for years, and my throat tightened in a clean, angry way. I called Celeste, and she said, "Do not confront him, document it," like she was slamming a gavel. Mara came over that night with her laptop and that steel teacher patience. We pulled the login logs, saved screenshots, and dated everything until it was boring and undeniable. Mara looked at the phone number on the report and said, "He thought you were too tired to notice, so let's make sure he regrets that." A couple days later, Evan came into the basement office holding his phone out. He showed me a screenshot of Kellen texting him by mistake, bragging, "Your mom has this whole thing locked, and your dad is going to walk away broke." Evan's face went stiff, and he said, "They're talking about me like I'm part of their plan." I didn't dump the full strategy on him. I just told him, "Stay close to me, keep your eyes open, and don't repeat adult conversations." And he nodded once before heading back upstairs. Nate kept smiling and fishing after that, sending sympathy texts with little questions tucked inside. I kept acting beat down, feeding him fake worries on purpose, and every time he carried them back to Maris, he tightened the trap for me. That night I typed, "I'm probably just going to take whatever she offers because I'm exhausted," and I hit send. I watched the little check mark pop up after I hit send, then I set my phone face down like it couldn't bite me anymore. The next time Nate saw Maris, he'd carry that fake weakness straight into her lap, and I wanted her comfortable enough to stop reading the fine print. Mediation started fast, like Maris had a calendar reminder set for when she could officially erase me. She hired Warren Whitlock, a pricey family law attorney who talked like he was reading from a brochure, careful and polished, never raising his voice because he didn't need to. When I walked into the conference room with Celeste, I made sure I looked tired on purpose, with my shoulders slumped and my eyes a little too hollow. Maris came in sharp and shiny, like she was headed to a grand opening. Giselle sat beside her with a purse on her lap like a judge's gavel, and Kellen hovered behind them like he belonged there. Warren gave a small smile and said, "Let's be efficient today, and let's keep emotions out of it." Celeste replied, "Efficiency works for us as long as the paperwork tells the truth," and she didn't even look impressed by his suit. When it was my turn to speak, I kept my voice low and simple. "I'm asking for $38,500 cash, my personal things, and a parenting schedule that keeps Evan stable," I said, like that was all I deserved after 15 years. Maris almost smiled, and Giselle actually did smile, slow and satisfied, like she was watching someone get put in their place. Maris said, "That's more reasonable than I expected," and I nodded like I was grateful. Celeste built the agreement the right way, and it was the kind of clean trap you didn't see until you were already inside it. The main document said Maris would take the house, the business, the leased vehicles, and all ownership interests, which was exactly what she'd been crowing about since day one. Warren skimmed that section and looked bored, like the outcome was already decided, and Maris held her pen like she was ready to autograph her own victory. Then Celeste slid an attachment into the packet, plain paper, plain title, nothing flashy to catch Maris's eye. It was the liability disclosure schedule, listing every mortgage, credit line, lease obligation, tax balance, and personal guarantee tied to those assets, line after line, like a weight settling in your stomach. Warren's eyes paused longer there, and his mouth tightened in the smallest way, the way a man reacts when he realizes his client is proud of a sinking ship. Warren cleared his throat and said, "Given the scope of these liabilities, I recommend an independent financial audit before my client signs anything final." Celeste answered, "We'll cooperate with any review you request, and we'll provide documents in an organized format." Maris leaned forward and snapped, "Audits are for people who don't know their own business," and she shot Warren a look like he'd insulted her. Warren didn't argue, but his pen tapped once against the folder, and I could tell he wanted the audit for his own protection. Maris refused it anyway, because refusing advice was her favorite hobby. Warren drafted an audit waiver stating he recommended a full review, and Maris declined against counsel's advice, and he read it out loud like he wanted the room to hear he tried. Maris waved her hand and said, "Put it in, I don't care," and she signed it like she was signing a dinner tab. At home, Kellen pushed for speed like our divorce was blocking his social plans. Evan heard it through the wall one night, Maris snapping that she wanted it wrapped up before some big spring gala, and Evan repeated it to me later with his jaw set. I told him, "You did the right thing by telling me, and you keep listening without jumping into their fights." And he nodded like he understood the assignment. Maris put on a show right after, taking Kellen to a trendy place in Shaco Slip called Variant Salt and posting photos like it was a victory lap. Nate texted me that night with his practiced sympathy, then slid the hook in like always. "Do you feel relieved that she's being reasonable because you deserve a break?" he wrote, and I could almost hear him smiling while he typed. I answered Nate with a weak little line he could deliver back to her. Then I picked up my folder and drove straight to Celeste's office to drop off the signed waiver copy. Celeste took the waiver copy, clipped it into the file, and didn't celebrate. She just looked at me like someone who'd locked the last latch on a door that had to hold. "Now we let the process do what it does," she said, and I answered, "Good, because I'm done improvising." I walked out with my folder lighter and my stomach heavy because the next room was always the one that mattered. A few weeks later, the final hearing landed on a Tuesday morning in February, early enough that the hallway still smelled like floor cleaner and stale coffee from a vending machine. My shoes squeaked on the wax tile and the overhead lights made everybody look a little sick. I saw Maris at the end of the hall before she saw me, dressed like a magazine cover with perfect hair and a sharp blazer, like she had lunch plans after court. Kellen waited outside courtroom 3C, pacing and checking his phone like the building owed him better service. He didn't come in because he didn't want to watch paperwork ruin the fantasy. When Maris walked past him, she didn't even slow down, and he mouthed something that looked like, "Hurry up," while she kept her face smooth. Inside, Judge Patrice Holden sat where she always sat, calm and unreadable, like she'd seen every version of love turning into an invoice. Celeste sat beside me with the packet stacked clean, and Warren Whitlock sat with Maris, posture straight, suit perfect, eyes sharp. The court reporter's keys clicked like rain, and it made the room feel smaller. Judge Holden looked at the agreement and did what judges do when a deal smells one-sided. "Mr. Rourke, do you understand what you're giving up?" she asked, and her voice stayed neutral like she was reading a checklist. "Are you being pressured by anyone to sign this today?" I kept my eyes down like I was ashamed, because shame was the costume Maris expected me to wear. "Yes, Your Honor. I understood what I was giving up," I said, steady and simple. No one was pressuring me, and I wanted it finished today. Maris's mouth twitched like she enjoyed hearing me sound small. Judge Holden turned to Maris. "Ms. Calder, do you understand the terms you demanded and the responsibilities attached to them?" she asked, and Maris answered too fast. "Yes, Your Honor, I understood everything," she said, chin lifted like she was closing a deal. Maris signed fast, flipping pages with the confidence of someone who thought the story ended when she got her signature on it. I signed slow, not for drama, but because I wanted every page clean and every initial in the right spot. My hand didn't shake, and I didn't rush, because rushing was how Maris hid messes. Celeste slid each page to me, tapped where I needed to initial, and kept her face blank. Warren reviewed the packet one more time like a professional doing his last safety check. He moved through the main document without a flinch, then he hit the liability disclosure schedule, and his face changed. It wasn't loud or dramatic, just drained, like the blood had left his cheeks and decided it had better places to be. His eyes flicked to the audit waiver, then back to the schedule, and his jaw tightened like he was swallowing a bad word. He leaned in close to Maris and whispered 5 words, real quiet, like he didn't want the room to hear. I didn't catch the words, but I saw her react like he'd told her the building was on fire. Her face went dead white, and her hand started shaking so hard the signature page fluttered. The confident mask cracked, and for a second she looked like a person who'd just realized the spotlight was powered by debt. Maris lifted her head and tried to speak, voice suddenly thin. Your Honor, there has to be a mistake, because I did not understand I was taking on all of that, she said, and she pointed at the schedule like it was a prank. Judge Holden cut it off without raising her voice. Ms. Calder, your attorney recommended a full review, she said, tapping the waiver. You declined against counsel's advice, and you signed in open court. These liabilities attach to the assets you demanded. Maris turned and looked at me like she was seeing me clearly for the first time, not as her helper, not as her shadow, but as a man who had been paying attention. I didn't give her a speech, and I didn't smirk because I didn't need to. Judge Holden finalized it, her pen moving calm and final across the page. I stood, thanked Celeste in a low voice, and walked out of courtroom 3C while Maris stayed seated with the papers shaking in her hands. The hallway air hit me colder than the courtroom, and I kept walking like if I stopped, I'd have to watch her break. Celeste fell in beside me long enough to say, "Do not engage her in the hallway," and I nodded without looking back. I didn't stay to watch the meltdown. I learned it the way you learn about storms after they pass, through texts, court notices, and people who suddenly just wanted to check in like they'd always cared. Every message felt nosy, but I saved the ones that mattered and ignored the rest. Evan told me Kellen bolted first. He sat at my kitchen table, eyes on his hands, and said, he packed a duffel late at night and didn't turn on a single light. Then he added, he slipped out through the garage, and I saw him from the upstairs landing. About 2 weeks later, Mara got a message from a former assistant at Maris's office. Mara read it out loud, and her mouth went tight when she hit the part about vendors calling nonstop. The assistant wrote that a bank rep even showed up in person, asking questions about missed payments like he didn't trust the phone anymore. After that, public records started stacking up like junk mail you couldn't unsubscribe from. Mechanics' liens, small claims filings, demand letters, all of it showing up with dates and case numbers like receipts. Celeste pulled what she could and translated the legal language into plain English, saying, "This means they're done waiting, and this means the money was never there." Maris tried selling the house, and I heard it from a realtor who'd once begged to get her listings. He texted me, "She wants a fast sale," and I didn't respond because I wasn't her customer. You can't sell your way out when the payoff numbers are bigger than the listing price, and pretty soon the word short sale started floating around like a bad smell. Giselle switched her tone and tried to reach me through Evan, acting soft like she'd been misled. Evan put her on speaker one afternoon and kept his voice flat while she said, "I never knew it was that bad, and your father is being cruel." Evan answered, "You packed Dad's things in trash bags, so do not pretend you are surprised now," and he ended the call with his thumb. Nate got nervous too, calling late with a shaky voice that didn't match his usual smooth act. "I just wanted to make sure you're okay," he said. Then he slipped and mentioned that trust paperwork like it was common knowledge. I let him talk himself into the hole, said, "I do not know what you're talking about," and after we hung up I wrote down the time, the number, and his exact wording. Celeste told me that slip mattered because it showed Nate wasn't just gossiping, he'd tried to get into financial information that wasn't his. She also got a surprise gift from Kellen, because guys like him always think attention is currency. He went on a small local podcast and told a survival story about dating a powerful businesswoman, and in the middle of his bragging he admitted she knew about loans against the house and was handling it. Celeste clipped the audio, saved it, and said, "He just proved she cannot play confused." By spring, Maris was meeting with bankruptcy attorneys, and I didn't watch it in person. I read it in filings, and I heard it in Evan's quiet updates at my kitchen table while he picked at a sandwich. When my phone buzzed with another notice, I opened my laptop, saved the PDF into our folder, and locked the screen. After I locked the screen, I sat in the quiet until the building settled. A few months after court, Evan and I were in a small Henrico County apartment with a tiny kitchen we painted muted green because it felt calm. Evan picked the color, and we rolled paint on the cabinets while a radio played low. I was rinsing a mug when someone knocked, firm and impatient, like they expected my life to still run on their schedule. I opened the door with the chain latched. Maris stood under the hallway light, and without the spotlight she looked smaller, tired around the eyes. No shine, none of that stage confidence. She tried to set her face into that ribbon-cutting smile, but it wouldn't hold. "I didn't know it was that bad," she said, and the words came out flat, like she was reporting weather. I didn't invite her in, and I didn't step aside. I kept my hand on the door edge where the chain was visible, not as a threat, just a boundary. Maris glanced past me as if she expected clutter and failure, then she started stacking excuses. "The bank changed terms, the market shifted, and Warren did not explain it right," she said. She lowered her voice and added, "Could you help me untangle some things, just so Evan does not get hurt?" She asked for 5 minutes inside to talk privately. That was when it hit me clean. She wasn't missing me, she was missing my labor. For 15 years, she treated my work like air, and now she wanted it back because the weight finally landed on her. Evan was in his room, and I heard his music stop when he recognized her voice, but he didn't come out. I kept my tone calm and plain and gave her one sentence. You asked for everything except the kid, and I gave you exactly what you asked for, I said. Her eyes flashed and she tried to throw blame in every direction. Warren should have caught it, the bank set me up, the market collapsed, and Kellen pushed me to move fast, she said, and she even tried. You always were better with numbers, so just help me fix it. I didn't argue, and I didn't correct her, because I was done participating in her stories. After a long minute, she stepped back, like she finally understood the help wasn't coming, and she walked away without yelling. Later, Celeste confirmed what I already felt. Ashford Bridge Trust was solid and untouchable, and Evan's future stayed protected. Not long after that, Nate lost his insurance license when Celeste filed a complaint, and investigators asked for records about the login attempt and his helpful requests. I wasn't rich, but I was stable, and Evan was steadier every week. I did clean bookkeeping for small contractors who paid their bills, and when the lock clicked after Maris's footsteps faded, I turned and knocked on Evan's door to start dinner. Real quick before you head out, have you ever had to draw a hard line with someone who only came back when they needed you to fix their mess? If you've got the hype button, tap it to support this video and help it reach more people. And please subscribe and hit like too. It's one click and it really matters. Then drop a comment, even if it's just good story, and tell me, would you help them again or let them carry what they created?